live the broadcast. Okay, hello Rob. So I'm Maple Leaf and I'm talking to Rob, and we're on YouTube. We normally chat on freechess.org's philosophy, politics, and religion. So how are you doing, Rob?
Good, how are you?
Good. So
sorry? Yeah, I agree with what is being said right now.
Ontological argument.
Yeah.
And what is being said? Can you summarize that position?
Simply saying something can be conceived does not make it actual. And it seems that this argument rests on what you can conceive of, or is involved with what you can conceive of, you know? So that's just one of the things I would agree with. Jimmy English.
Right. Let me say that I don't believe that's what the ontological argument is.
Yeah, that's not what the argument actually is, but it's involved.
I don't believe
that you can conceive of.
I don't believe that's what it's saying. I think it has problems, but I don't believe that that's what the argument is saying. There is a video.
Yeah, I know that that's not what the argument says, but that's one of the things that I would start with. I'd start by saying that there's a difference between what you can conceive of and what is real. I mean, like, with regards to thinking about an infinite God or whatever.
Let me say that.
And someone else has said something similar. Now, Happy Child is also thinking that that's what's involved. I think of God, therefore God exists. And that seems to be what the argument's involved with. That's not what the argument says. I mean, that would be a silly thing to say. Just because I can conceive of an infinite God, then therefore he exists. That's not what the argument is, but it's involved with something similar.
There is a video discussing it in quite a bit of detail, and so what I will do is in the notes below the video later, it won't be for the live event, but later I will post a link to that video that just kind of explains the argument, and then they go through some criticisms of it, the people in that discussion. In the meantime, I'll give you at least what my understanding is St. Anselm's version of the argument. Okay. My understanding, part of it's on watching the video, and I read St. Anselm's paper. It's 17 pages. Some people, maybe that's a lot. Actually, for a philosophy paper, I didn't think it was actually that bad. So, okay, so let me just try and give you a summary of what I think St. Anselm's version of the argument. So it goes like this. He says, think of something, think of anything, right? And now think of something greater. Okay? So it's a challenge. You got to
I know the argument.
Thinking of something better. Right. So this summary then is for the viewers, but the summary you gave doesn't sound anything like what I'm saying. But let me just finish the summary.
That's not a summary of it at all. That's not a summary of it at all. What I wrote. Sorry.
Okay. Well, let me say what I think the argument is generally, and then we can talk about criticisms, objections to it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, there's a challenge thrown out. You start with anything, and then think of something better. Think of something, and then when you, think of something better than that. And St. Anselm just keeps throwing out that challenge. And I'll explain why this is an important aspect to the argument later. Later, when we talk about the objections, I'll explain why this is important. So he's got this challenge to keep thinking something better, and ultimately he wants to say, well, if you understand the challenge that I'm throwing out there, then you have to accept that existence is going to be greater than, or better than, or greater than something without something existing is going to be greater than something non-existing. Okay, so you throw, I don't know, you say a bridge. If it exists better than a bridge, it doesn't exist, and then you add all the powers that God has. That's better than something without those powers, and you eventually end up with not just God, but an existing entity. And it's part of the challenge, and I want to be clear on that because he's not actually defining it as existing, which according to the other video, is a mistake a lot of people make when they make a kind of quick criticism of it. And actually, thinking about this, it also seems to make it harder to just refute easily, right? Although I do think there's a problem with the argument. Just saying, let's say, existence is included by definition is actually not correct. So, okay, so I said
Existence is what?
one of the objections is that saying that the definition includes existence, and then trying to dismiss it that way. So the objection is we're just defining God as existent. We're saying he exists by definition. I'm saying that objection is incorrect, because that's actually not what St. Anselm did anyway. There's other versions of the ontological argument. Another famous writer was René Descartes, wrote in the 1600s. He corresponded with Queen Elizabeth, so I think that's 1600s. So his version is a little bit different, but in St. Anselm's version, that doesn't seem to be correct. I don't believe that objection works, to just say, and that's to me the objection that's closest to what you and Happy and Jimmy English were saying. Which would, but I don't actually believe that what you guys are saying is even as good as that objection, to be totally honest with you.
Yeah, I'm not even clear really, but I didn't say that what I had written was a refutation or anything. All I said was that just because you can think of something doesn't make it real.
Sure. I suppose that's true.
I think, yeah. So you make this distinction between thoughts and stuff that's actually real.
Sure. And I think that's what Immanuel Kant was doing. But we'll come to that. We'll come to that after. I don't believe that. Well, so first of all, are you clear on my characterization of the argument? And do you have any objections to it, or any questions about the characterization?
Let me read this. It goes, number one, it is a conceptual truth, true by definition, that God is a being than which none greater can be imagined. 2. God exists as an idea in the mind. 3. A being that exists as an idea in the mind and in reality is, other things being equal, greater than a being that exists only as an idea in the mind. Thus, if God exists only as an idea in the mind, then we can imagine something that is greater than God. 5. We cannot imagine something that is greater than God, therefore God exists. Yeah, I mean, I was familiar with the argument a while ago, but reading it now, I'm thinking this is absolute rubbish.
Okay. Now, first, let me say that that version that you have, first of all, is that Wikipedia? By the way, where is that version?
This is just some website.
Website, okay.
Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy.
that version sounds like Descartes' version, or it reminds me of Descartes, because he talked about, Descartes' challenge was solipsism, so he's sort of trapped in this, with ideas, and his five senses, the information coming in through his five senses, and he's trying to basically demonstrate an external world, apart from just his own, because you can't, how do you distinguish that in your senses? So it's the same thing as, if anyone has seen The Matrix, it's the same kind of problem in the movie The Matrix, where the person's in a computer-generated world, and you're trying to distinguish that from the real world, right? There's the philosophical underpinning of that movie, but he also in the second part starts to bring in God, and he uses the ontological argument to do that. But let me say that Saint Anselm's version to me seems stronger, because he's not. Saint Anselm's not just starting with all these assumptions about being trapped in your mind and all that. With Descartes, because of the nature of the problem he was addressing, he had to have all those assumptions. So I think Saint Anselm's argument is a little more concrete. And it's a challenge. It's not about thoughts in your mind versus reality. He's not distinguishing. St. Anselm is not saying what's in my mind versus something really existing. That's not how he talks about it. In fact, maybe that's a question. What is he saying existence is? So, okay, so any response to what I've said so far?
Well, this is a topic. It's probably very interesting.
Yes, I think it's interesting.
But I mean, and it's good for people to talk about it or whatever. But for me, just reading that version, it seems to me like the argument is just trying to confuse people and trick them into thinking that this is an argument for God's existence.
You've studied meditations, the Descartes' meditations?
Yeah, I did, yeah. But I mean, to me the argument seems to say you can think about God, and then it says if God is only an idea in the mind, then we can imagine something that is greater than God. But we cannot imagine something that is greater than God. I mean, it's like you should be thinking about what is an idea. It's just a representation of something else. Ideas don't claim to actually be what they represent.
So first, I would suggest putting that version of the argument aside and thinking about the challenge that St. Anselm put forward. So that because it's just more clear, we're not talking about minds and stuff like that. It's just a more clear version. But even so, I'm not 100% sure why it sounds to you like it's an attempt to confuse. Can you explain?
Well, I mean, the conclusion is that God exists, but all he's done in the argument is say there are thoughts, and there are greater thoughts, and it's like I don't see any substance in the argument. There's no logical steps or to reach such a great conclusion that God exists. I mean, yeah, I don't like to be negative, so.
Well, no, if you don't think the argument works.
But it's like.
But is it just a gut feeling? What is it that makes it not work? What is it that makes the argument not work?
There's no argument there. I mean, he says God exists as an idea in the mind, and then he says, but ideas that were also real are greater than just ideas. And then he says, well, that's impossible because it's a contradiction and therefore God exists. But
yeah, first of all, I mean,
I don't understand how you get to that conclusion. I mean, how do you get to that conclusion just because there's a contradiction in your mind about something?
yeah.
Why would that mean that God exists?
Well, first of all, this version of the argument. So you're talking about one version, and I'm talking about another version.
Yeah.
So that's a problem. That's a problem right there. You're talking about what sounds like Descartes' version, and I'm talking about Saint Anselm. So that's an issue. Now, I believe ultimately you probably could get a similar understanding out of Descartes' version. It's just that because Descartes is talking about a whole other issue as well, right? Because he had all the I forget where we are in his book, but it's like it's like the third or fourth part in Meditations, and but when he starts talking about God and the external world, that's becoming almost like the second half or something like that, the second section, because he had to bring the immediate world. He had to prove that first, which even that, has that even ever been achieved, if you want to look at it that way? Where the earlier steps in Descartes' argument even achieved, much less, trying to prove God's existence. So, so I think there's a lot of baggage in the Cartesian version of the argument. While St. Anselm seems to be just more focused on the issue of, and his way of putting it, where it's put forward as that challenge that I mentioned, challenge to think of something greater. He's not talking about it being in your mind or not being in your mind. But I have to say, I don't think Descartes is trying to confuse anyone. It's just that in the earlier part of the Meditations, where he's dealing with the other subjects, he starts to build a system, and now he's got all those assumptions in the system he's already built. Any response to what I've said so far?
The Meditations from Descartes is very, very difficult for me to read. So I mean, and it was a long time ago when I read it. I wish I could have read it right now so I could talk to you about it and stuff. But
right. Well, we could cover the basic issues and basic problems, and then maybe later go back and read.
I have one question. It's like, how does there being a contradiction imply that God exists?
Well,
I mean, maybe I don't understand the argument at all, but which is wrong because I do, because I can read it. I just read it, but I mean, how does he actually get to that conclusion? I mean, when you make a conclusion, usually it's because there's some kind of structure to your argument that leads you to that conclusion. I mean, it seems like he's just pulled it out of nowhere. We can imagine something, we cannot imagine something that is greater than God. Therefore, God exists. It's like, I mean, yeah.
Well,
so have I got it wrong?
I think what he's saying, and like I said, I don't feel the Descartes version is as good, so I just want to be clear. I would rather maybe I email you a link to St. Anselm's version, and we read that and talk about that. But let me do my best to try to explain what Descartes is saying. Okay? Descartes is saying, if I'm stuck in this solipsistic, what solipsism is, like you have your ideas, you have your thoughts, but he doesn't know if the thought of the table in front of him is an actual table. doesn't know if there's a real world around him or if it's some kind of generated. Oh, just one sec, our connection is gone bad. Okay, it's back. So he doesn't know if how to put this. He's fighting that battle, trying to prove the external world, trying to prove we're not being deceived by the things around us, and in that context, right? He says, okay, well, I know what I mean. I know what I mean when I say God, right? I know what I mean by that. But when he says just an idea in my mind, that's how he means existence. That's what he means by existing. So you can't, if it's not just an idea in my mind, it'll be something greater than if it is just an idea. As long as we understand what God is, we have to accept that it's not just an idea in our minds. Something like that. So, sorry, I had some feedback going. I didn't even realize it. It was a mistake on my part. Still there?
Yeah.
Okay. Did I help to explain it all, or should I try again?
I'll have to go over it again. I mean, this is a ridiculously confusing argument. It doesn't have any...
Descartes'
it doesn't seem to...
In my view, Descartes' meditation is actually fairly clearly written, but that section is the most confusing section.
Yeah.
Don't forget, it was also written in French, and we're reading a translation as well, on top of everything else. Do you want me to try to go over it again, or do you have any questions about what I said? I had the actual YouTube window feeding back. I don't know if it messed up how I sound.
Yes, I mean, supposing a maximally great being not to exist leads to a contradiction. Oh, yeah, okay. So you're saying if you suppose that a maximally great being does not exist, you reach a contradiction. Therefore, the conclusion can be that a maximally great being does exist.
Yeah, go on.
I mean, I sort of understand how you would think that he can draw that conclusion a little bit better now. But, I mean, I'm not saying that the actual structure of the argument is completely rubbish, but the substance is where it's... so, I mean, you can, if you assume something and then prove a contradiction, you can assert the negation of what you assumed, right? But then, when you actually look at the substance of the argument, I mean, he's talking about thoughts, and then he all of a sudden at the end says, well, yeah. Anyway, I have to think about it a bit more, but thanks for your help.
The way Descartes... Well, first let me say, I think there's a big problem. Even like Descartes set up this big challenge. I'm stuck in all these ideas. How do I know there's an external world to myself? And he's trying to make this distinction between just thoughts and external world. And I personally, I'll tell you, I actually have a problem with that. I don't believe Descartes is successful at even making the distinction that an external world is somehow better than all your ideas. you're in a computer-generated world. That's just the world you're in. It's a world of quote-unquote ideas. So I actually, just the whole assumption of trying to distinguish the different world of ideas versus real world, I actually think, I never really bought that Descartes was successful at getting himself out of that problem. So, any more thoughts? Did you say you're gonna watch the Academy Awards?
Yeah, it's okay. I'll repeat it later on. Alright, let's recap. Just for me, right?
Sure.
Even though... Okay. So... I can imagine a maximal being. So, but I mean... So first he says, I can imagine a maximal being. Then he says, about halfway through, I can't imagine a maximal being, because it wouldn't be maximal. Do you agree with that, or?
Well, I see what he's trying to say. He's trying to say that, if he tries, so he's talking about the attempt. If he attempts to just think of this being as just thought, well, that's not really what it is. There's a problem with the whole idea of just thinking of as a thought, right? Because
fair enough.
It wouldn't be a quote-unquote maximal being, unquote.
And for me, I'd have to think about the nature of greatest. I mean, it doesn't really even explain what maximal, what kind of direction his God wants to be in. Most arguments for God are about creation or something like that. But
yeah, one thing that both St. Anselm and Descartes are doing is they're trying to make a deductive argument as opposed to an inductive argument, and that's truly different than all the other arguments for God's existence that I know of. And maybe there's some other deductive argument. This is, it's interesting. I mean, to try and just do it with definitions and that kind of thing. Although actually maybe Descartes is maybe going a little bit beyond that, because I guess these ideas and stuff could count as experience of some kind. You know about synthetic and analytic and distinction and all of that. But Descartes maybe could be in some ways talking about a kind of experience when he talks about quote-unquote ideas. So I don't know if it is truly deductive argument. I'm not sure.
Am I on the camera? Can you see me?
Let me go to the... Has someone joined us? I still have your logo.
No.
Okay.
Okay.
I still have your still picture. Oh, actually, no. I thought I saw your camera. Okay, so
This is a conceptual.
Do you want to make some more thoughts, concluding thoughts, maybe?
Yeah. So I mean, so the structure of the argument is, what did Philosophicus put it as, a reductio ad absurdum. So
this means the actual argument itself. I haven't actually read Philosophicus' text. Is he talking? Is he in channel? Is he in the philosophy channel?
Yeah, I've been typing to them in the philosophy channel this whole time.
Oh, I should have guessed. You're in two conversations at the same time.
But I'm just asking him, like, so I mean, Yeah. So maybe I was wrong, or I was too quick to I didn't put this. I didn't even get the connection between a maximal being and a god. I thought he was just bringing up maximal things.
He's trying to use a
Yeah.
synonym,
So I
but
mean, and
also, yeah.
why does he even use the word god then?
Well, because
I
he's
mean,
talking about
it's fair
God.
enough that you want to talk about maximal beings, but it's like, so I mean, he really wants me to think about whether or not the being that I can conceive of that is maximal is God, or I mean,
But I
I
wouldn't get
didn't
hung up
even
on
put
that.
that connection together. Sorry?
I wouldn't get hung up on that. I would try to think. I wouldn't get hung up on whether he calls it God or maximal being. I would just try to think about this whole problem of trying to go from thoughts, something in my mind, to something existing. Right? I would that jump. Right? I mean, we didn't actually talk about objections, so this is probably the first objection is getting from something in your mind to something really existing. Right?
Um,
Is and also the idea of greater, like if something is
yeah.
maximal, then you add the characteristic and it somehow becomes better, right? So
Does
something
it
in
even like?
something in the world around us is somehow better than an idea in our mind. So I can
I'd
tell
have
you,
to.
I can tell you right now that there is something about that doesn't make sense to me. There's something
Which
about that.
maximal?
No, if he's trying to think of a being in his thoughts, just existing in his thoughts, and he says, you know what? That's a contradiction, or there's a problem with that because it's not a maximal being if it's just in my thoughts. Okay, that's his argument.
You know, in my opinion, that is just a trick. I mean, he hasn't. You've got to think about what thoughts actually are. They're models. They're representation.
Well,
Thoughts never ever claim to
you're
be
a chess
anything more
player, right?
than
You're a chess player. Tricks work. Tricks sometimes work.
what? Tricks work.
Tricks sometimes
Oh,
work.
tricks work. Fair enough.
Sure. Play
But I
some
mean,
chess.
this one here is just so ridiculously convoluted. Like, I mean, I didn't even understand it when I read it. I'm like,
Yeah,
I thought
I
he
know what you're
was,
saying.
I thought he had God on one side and maximal being contradiction on the other. I didn't realize that.
Well, the project,
Yeah,
the project is to go from just thinking about something in your mind, which is how an atheist thinks of God, and say, well, no, it's not just in my mind; it's real. It's a real existing thing. So that's the project, to go from this idea in your mind to something that's beyond your mind. I guess. So he's saying, well, if it's a maximal being, how can it just be the mind? Right? That's the project is trying to engage in. Now,
are you going home soon or something? Hello?
in your mind, an idea
Sorry,
in
you
your
cut
mind
out for a
versus
bit.
outside of your mind in the real world.
Yeah. But
And
I mean, if you
he's
want
trying
to
to say
say
we're
that,
back to
why
that.
do you need to say all this other
Oh,
shit?
yeah.
Like,
Well, we're getting it's a bit choppy.
I gotta go to the loo, bro.
Well, as I was saying before, he's already.
I just gotta go to the toilet, man.
I'll just talk when as you go.
Okay, no worries.
So Descartes. Sure, I'll just talk this when you go. So um, Descartes is, and I want to repeat. I don't even like working with the Cartesian version. It's just so complicated. I'd rather say an Anselm. But okay, we're sort of stuck in this talking with Descartes, because that was the example that was brought up. Descartes spent 3 or 4 chapters trying to talk about. Remember, his initial problem, he didn't even know if he existed himself, and he puts forth an argument for that. I actually think that was a good argument. Then he tries to talk about other things, external world. He's trying to lay out some definitions and thoughts about all these assumptions he's made. He's ultimately laying the groundwork for this system he's trying to build. So by the time he gets to proving God's existence, he has all those other assumptions that he made, like what's in my mind, what's not in my mind, what am I deceived about, or the things in my mind that I'm deceived about. All that stuff he dealt with in earlier chapters. So now, by the time he gets to proving God's existence, he has all those other things that they talked about in earlier chapters. So I think, and I'm going to repeat this again, but this is going to happen in St. Anselm as well, that whole process of getting from I just have this idea in my mind versus it's real, the going from one to the other has the problem of, now in his case he says that, well, the second situation is greater than the first. Something being real is greater than, or more maximal, in terms he used, more maximal than just something that's an idea in my mind. And right away, that actually, something about that makes sense to me. Because, you get all these other possibilities, like maybe our world is computer generated, for example, and well, everything would at some level be ideas. The distinction between an idea and real is already problematic in that sense. So I'll just mention, I hate to bring up another philosopher, but Barclay the Idealist, I think actually handles this stuff better, because he, in the case of Barclay, he just says it's all ideas. That makes sense to me. I even think that modern physics is going something with this direction anyway.
Hello.
Hi. So I was just talking about Barclay and idealism to try to explain Descartes, which I don't. What I was suggesting is that idealists somehow, in my view, explain things better than Descartes in terms of just ideas in your mind versus reality. This is what we call dualism, right? This is a kind of dualism.
Yeah.
And
I have a problem with this ontological argument.
Sure.
I mean, he talks about a maximal being, or a conceivable maximal being. It doesn't really explain that, or make any connection between that thing and God. I mean, he doesn't even say what God. I mean, does he mean the creator of the universe, or does he mean just some infinite thing? Or, I mean, so.
Well, don't forget Spinoza and Leibniz. When they came after Descartes, they're building on his ideas, right? Everyone should know. Everyone should know Leibniz, who was the co-inventor of calculus. But they were much more. They were much more rigorous in how they talked about God and his relationship to, in some case, perceptions and things like that. Versus, Spinoza actually goes. He's very. He's saying much more specifically, answering your kind of questions that you're putting forward much more specifically, and they're all the quote unquote rationalists, right? Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz are the quote unquote rationalists. So they're the same. They're the same kind of idea. But in Spinoza's case, he ends up equating God to all of nature. You know, he
Yeah,
just
fair enough. And because, I mean, when you talk about a maximal thing that you can conceive of, I mean, you've got to ask, what is it that you can conceive of? What do you think about? And what are what is the nature of a thought that you would think about with regards to the physical world or infinite things? I mean, and so what is the nature of it? I mean, is it just the universe or nature, or I mean, what is a maximal being? Or I mean, we're the ones who have to think of it according to this argument initially. So I mean, and what is the nature of that thought? And why does Anselm need to equate it to God, or does he, or I mean, what properties does he ascribe to this maximal being, or what properties does he ascribe to God? I mean, for me, when you talk about God, you'd be thinking of a creator.
Yeah, so first of all, I want to be clear that we're talking about Descartes here, not Anselm.
Okay,
we
yeah.
haven't really discussed we haven't really discussed the Anselm version, which, as I said before, I think it's a stronger version of the argument. But since we're talking about Descartes, I would say that he's not going to try to answer those questions. He just wants to say that this maximal being exists. He's going to be focused on that.
Yeah.
He's not going to. He's not going to go down all these other tangents, right?
Am I right about this maximal being equated to God in these arguments?
Yes, but I don't think it
Okay.
makes sense to get hung up on going beyond what he's trying to show and then seeing the
It's
problems.
the reason I would say that is because, like, he's I mean, what has he proved exists according to him? What is it that he has proved exists? Has he proved that? So I mean, he claims to have proved that a maximal being exists. So I mean, if that's his argument, I mean, that's great. But what is a maximal being? And
Yeah, I don't see the point of being being unhappy about not knowing what a
sorry, I'm
maximal
just
being
saying
is.
that.
We just need to know that.
I say that because it's like, what can we conceive of is not that fantastic. I can conceive of tables and chairs. What else can I conceive of? A tree. So it's like, if I do prove that the maximum of my thoughts exists, what is that? Is it a group of tables and trees? Or, you know what I mean? This argument seems to have left out um, any kind of description of the nature of a god or a religious god, a Christian god maybe.
Let me
Anyway, that's one of the.
also suggest, now, St. Anselm's argument is 17 pages, and then he's got another, he's got another essay responding to a criticism. So it's actually two essays. One just, he outlines the ontological argument. Actually, he does talk a lot about what he thinks God is. He does relate it a little bit to Christian concept, but he's not so focused.
Yeah.
He's not really focused on that. It just
I mean, Anselm
he mentions
was Anselm a priest as well?
he was a monk. 1200, I
Right.
think either 1200 or 1300.
It's like 1000, I think, yeah. But,
St. Anselm.
so what's a monk? Is that like a priest or a Christian monk? There's a difference between that and a priest.
I don't actually. I'm the wrong person to ask. Let's just put it that way. I am the wrong person.
I guess if a monk doesn't give sermons or something, and a monk doesn't talk. Well, this guy talks.
But Saint Anselm, he in his second essay, where he responds to this objection of, so what someone said is, if I suppose I have an island, and it's a great island, and it's a perfect island. He just kept making the island better, bigger and better. He said, why isn't that exist? This fantasy island. So Saint Anselm has a response to that, which is, well, you still haven't answered the challenge. But remember, Saint Anselm puts form of challenge. So that you can still think of something better. Keep adding characteristics. Keep stacking more characteristics on until you get quote unquote God. Right. So, and actually, I think that argument works. Actually, I think that argument.
You think which argument works?
I think Saint Anselm's defense to that objection.
You like to. You told me that that these arguments are related in some way.
Because you asked why isn't it a set of, you said why isn't it a set of tables? So I feel he's kind of responding.
Yeah, sorry.
You said why isn't it a set of tables? And I said, well, Saint Anselm did actually respond to an objection similar to that. That's what I said.
Okay. Yeah.
Because you asked why isn't it a set of tables? Right. You can always add characteristics onto your set of tables that makes it bigger and better, greater, more powerful, whatever. You keep just stacking on characteristics until they're not set of tables anymore. Maybe this, you know about the spaghetti monster?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I think maybe the response is a possible response to the spaghetti monster, although the spaghetti monster is not. It's not thought of in the ontological argument is it's a question of whether they're compatible issues or not. I'd have to think about it. I'd have to sit down and think about it or read about it or something.
Let me say one thing before we.
Yeah, go
on. Just as a side, I mean, if you wanted to talk about whether or not real physical objects do exist,
yeah,
as opposed to thoughts in your mind or whatever, then there's no need to write an argument with God in it and prove that God exists. I mean, that will confuse the reader. Yeah, anyway. Sorry, I just wanted to say that.
I don't understand what you're getting at. I don't really understand what you said.
You said maybe I should forget about the God aspect of the argument and just try to think about how he's proving that objects exist or that I exist or something. But I'm saying that if he wanted to do that, he probably should have left out all the stuff about God.
Okay,
I think he is trying to prove that God, the Creator, exists. Well, that's what he wanted to do, but I'm saying that.
If I said that, I apologize because I certainly didn't mean to say that. I certainly didn't mean to. If I said that, I certainly didn't mean to say that. What I said is, what I meant to say is that when we're talking about that maximal, in the Descartes version, the maximal being, there's all these things that can mean, and what I'm suggesting is, for the sake of argument, focus on existence and not all the other characteristics. Why get bogged down with that? It's sort of irrelevant, I guess, is what I was trying to say.
So yeah, I mean that's what I just said, isn't it? That's what you're saying is that. I mean, he's trying to prove that something exists, right?
But you're saying why talk about the nature of that
actual thing.
You're saying why talk about God, or I don't know actually what you're. I'm actually not 100% sure.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I don't know what words.
If this argument is purpose was to prove that not God exists, but just something exists, then there is no need to write about God at all. We might be talking about a different argument. Actually, I want to post the.
I really don't understand how you conclude. I kind of don't get how you concluded that. I'm just not seeing how you.
Well, I mean, the whole argument is written about God, and then you told me, well, don't even worry about God. We were just talking about existence then.
No. That's not. If I said that, I apologize. I didn't mean to say that. I'm just saying. Think of this: a couple of aspects about it. In fact, seeing Anselm in his paper, and this is why it's so much better. He actually says we're not trying to completely understand every part of God. That's impossible. We're just trying to understand a few small things about him. He actually says that in his paper.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you've understood what I've said, and maybe you don't like it, right? But I haven't actually stressed why I brought it up.
Okay.
I mean, the reason I do is because the stuff you can conceive of, I mean, you can prove that exists, maybe, like Anselm has done here, or Descartes did, by proving that a maximal being exists. But it's like proving a few chairs exists or something like that. You know, that's how I want to emphasize that the quality of our thoughts, or what we can conceive of, is very, very, very small and insignificant. Maybe that's what I'm trying to stress. So, I mean, if you wanted to prove there's a few chairs, then he might have done that, but I'm not sure. Yeah, he needs to understand that you
Go on.
Yeah. Proving that God exists or whatever, or I mean, you need to find out what God is, and if you're saying, sorry, I have to. This is very, this is the first time I've actually gone through this, and it's very, very, very confusing and convoluted. I'm certain that this argument is rubbish, and I can prove it.
Sure. I mean, I don't think it's. I'll tell you my own opinion. It's not so much that the argument is completely rubbish. It's that it does try to pose a challenge, in my view, that it doesn't quite achieve. But I actually think the argument's a lot better than people give it credit for. A lot of the simple attempts at refuting it actually don't work. Like the first example I gave about saying it's existence by definition. That objection actually doesn't work. So I think it's a kind of an ingenious attempt to achieve such a big goal, but because that goal was so difficult to achieve, I don't know if it did achieve it. I guess it's my general overview of the argument.
Yeah, for me, I tend to dislike traditional philosophy. So when I read it, I have a vendetta against it. So it's like, and when I read this, I just think that he's just trying to confuse people. Basically, that's the way I see it. I mean,
well, what kind of philosophy? Yeah, go on. What kind of philosophy do you like? Is what I was going to say.
I do like Descartes, but I don't like it when philosophers try to confuse people and try to make people feel inadequate, or as though they don't understand something or whatever. And this argument here is just, and maybe fair enough. It's not easy to be alive and try to deal with the fact that you can't prove that God exists. I mean, let him do whatever he wants, but this argument is just trickery.
I think what happened is he's also dealing with issues that are to him so confusing that it comes through in his writing. At least that part of the meditations. That part of the meditations, I think, are confusing. but it's because the issues were confusing. The issues he's struggling with are confusing. I don't think he purposely tried to confuse people. But that's just my opinion.
I guess, yeah, my initial interpretation, when I first look at it, it's like his conclusion. The conclusion that I have here, according to this website, it says that it's Anselm's argument, and the conclusion is, therefore God exists. And it seems that, and then when I read it over, it's like he doesn't really say what God is, what he's proving exists. He just writes G-O-D. So I mean,
yeah, well, don't forget Anselm's essay, 17 pages.
Oh, okay, right. But I mean, I'm pretty sure that the summary that I have written right here is very indicative of the argument. The one I read out.
I don't think it is, and I don't think that's Anselm's version. I think that's Descartes.
Well, according to this website,
is that Encyclopedia of Philosophy?
Can I post? No, it's Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, Anselm, Ontological Argument for God's Existence.
Post it in channel 37. Post it in the philosophy channel on freechess.org, and I'll take a look at it. So I see this essay. Go to freechess.org to the philosophy channel, and he's going to post it there.
Yeah, I posted it there. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm looking it up. It is looks like it's one of the anselms. I think Encyclopedia of Philosophy is standard, but this is a different one.
I'm going to read it out loud again. It is a conceptual truth that God is being than which is a being than which none greater can be imagined. So he's ascribing one property to God there, I suppose, but and then he says 2, God exists as an idea in the mind. And then 3, a being that exists as an idea in the mind and in reality is, other things being equal, greater than a being that exists only as an idea in the mind.
That is not Anselm's version. That's Descartes. I just want to say.
So you're telling me that this website's completely wrong about what Anselm's argument is?
No.
Then I'm reading the wrong argument. We're talking about different arguments then. If God exists only as an idea in the mind, then we can imagine something that is greater than God.
About Descartes, since that's what you quoted.
Sorry, it cut out. It cut out for like 20 seconds. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah. Anselm never talks about ideas in his mind at all.
So this argument, whoever wrote this web page has misinterpreted.
You know what? Wait. Oh, just a second. I'm now on the page you posted, and they have a quote from Anselm above that, but then they summarize it in quote-unquote standard form, and then they completely write Descartes' version. So whoever constructed the page on the ontological argument, they actually have a quote from Anselm, but you're not reading that. You're reading the list of steps under that. See that? They have, quote, even a fool when he hears of. That's the Anselm quote.
I think that,
but then under that, they do a list of steps. Under that, they do a list of steps, and the steps completely are. But I want to be clear on this. They quote a small paragraph from Anselm's 17-page essay, right? And they do a list of steps. under that, which when they call it the quote-unquote standardized form, but it's Descartes' version, because Anselm never said idea of the mind. Look at the quote from Anselm. You see, he never says the end of the mind in his quote. But even the quote they have.
Well, he talks about things which can be conceived in the understanding.
True. Right, but it's different. He means something different.
And I mean, so
he is saying something different when he says that.
There's a distinction between something that's real and something that's in the mind.
Yeah, you know what I think is a better page to check? It's the Wikipedia page on the Ontological. If you had to just read one thing,
I mean,
Wikipedia is actually
familiar
better
with it now. I mean, I can understand
this page
it now.
is mixed it up. This page is mixed it up, but believe it or not, the Wikipedia page on it is not bad. If you want to read one thing and learn about it, that's the place to go. It looks like, because this maybe the Encyclopedia Philosophy on that Stanford has a better version. I haven't checked it in a while.
And you know what? I think that these guys assume that something can exist in reality, not just in the understanding. I mean, they're definitely not proving anything about that, but they assume that. They assume that things can exist in reality and not just in the understanding alone, like idealism.
Or like a computer-generated world or something. Right? Like the whole brain in the vat problem.
Yeah. So, I mean, you were talking about how Descartes in the Meditations spoke about trying to prove that objects exist or in the physical world and not just in the mind, maybe. Which he does, but with regards to,
and I don't think he's
particular argument,
I don't think he's successful. I don't think Descartes is successful in getting outside
neither
of
do
his
I.
mind.
But my only point is that when you look at the ontological argument, they don't try to prove that things can exist in reality and not just in the understanding. They assume it. I'll just point that out.
Well, let me just say that, at least in Descartes' case, I have to think about St. Anselm, but in Descartes' case, what you just said is not really correct. He does prove that's what his whole essay in the Meditations is about. He's trying to prove the external world. So it's not correct. I just want to be clear. I just want to be clear.
He does talk about it, but
that's what the whole essay is
about. I realize that Sorry? But
so I think you said something incorrect.
Sorry. No, I didn't say something.
But you got to look at it this way. You're looking at it. You go to a web page and you're seeing 5 points out of his essay, right? But 3 chapters before that, he's talking about the thoughts versus the external world. I
know. I read the book.
They don't talk about it. So
I mean,
that summary is
this
incorrect.
is just one argument, though.
Okay, but I want to be clear that what you just said is not.
It is true. I said that with regards to the ontological argument, it is assumed that things can exist in reality and not just in the understanding alone. When you look at it as an isolated argument, if you want to go a few chapters back and look at that, but I mean, if you look at the Wikipedia page for the ontological argument, it doesn't say anything about proving that physical objects can exist, because that's not what it's about. But anyway,
So we can't just look at those 6 points and say it's not saying these other things. He did talk about those other things. He did talk about what's in the mind versus the external world. He spoke a lot about that, more about that than God.
But is that part of the ontological argument?
That was the main issue of the whole book.
Yeah, but was that part of the ontological argument?
It's
no. Not at all. That's not what the ontological argument is.
Well, it's in the preamble, yes.
It's a separate issue
I'd have
that
to
he
say
talks
yes
about.
to that question. I have to say yes. But in the meditations, right? In the meditations, he talks about, he spends like, it's the preamble to
Anyway,
the ontological.
sorry, okay, let's say the ontological argument actually does also prove that physical objects exist and not just in the understanding alone. And the reason I bring that up is that we do need to look
No,
at that
that's not what I said.
distinction.
That's not what I said. But what we're disagreeing on is what did Descartes write, and I'm saying.
No, I didn't. I'm not talking about just what he wrote in his whole life. I'm just talking about the ontological argument.
I'm just. Yeah, in the ontological argument's like in the middle of his writing. So the chapters before.
But I mean, I'm not just talking about Descartes.
Okay. So I just want to be clear on this. I just want to be clear on this because it was stated incorrectly what's in there. So I just want to be clear what is it. On the
anyway, the point
the ontological argument is in the middle of the book, and in the preamble, in the chapters running up to it, he spends a lot of time talking about ideas versus external world. So it is all part of the run-up to it.
The ontological argument is any one of a category of philosophical arguments for the existence of God using ontology.
Yeah, go on.
Yeah. Anyway, the point I wanted to bring up was, I mean, these philosophers also do talk about the real versus just in the mind, and maybe that is related to the ontological argument. But from those 6 points that I had on that webpage, reading this particular summarized, or to me it looks like you really have to analyze something that exists in the mind in reality versus something that exists in the mind. I mean, because that's just trickery. But anyway, I have to think about it a bit more.
Maybe what I posted. I noticed that further down the page. The link you posted, it does actually have the response, the island argument that I talked about.
Okay.
So
I'm gonna
that's
copy this out and write it out. Being that exists as an idea. So you said you spoke to some other guy and you disagreed with him about the Anselm's arguments and shit. What did he say?
Earlier, the challenge. Anselm issues a challenge.
I don't know if the coverage is cutting out.
It's more like the Anselm version.
I don't know. Yeah, I couldn't hear you for like a minute there.
Okay. So I'll tell you what, I'm going to look up the links and I'll put them in the description box of the video, and then we can talk about them later, or we can talk about a different subject. I can tell you right now.
I'm sorry, I'm writing it out.
I'd rather talk about a non. I'm sorry, I'm writing it out. I'd rather talk about it. I'd rather not talk about religion. To be totally honest with you, I'd rather pick another philosophy topic. I'm getting kind of bored of it.
Religion? Oh, you mean God and stuff?
Yeah, because I mean, no one's convinced by anything, so I'm just finding it less interesting than I used to. But but stuff like science and scientific method, I find that stuff interesting right now. Like Karl Popper and all that.
Hey, here's another idea.
Yeah.
When you do conceive things, they are memories of the physical objects you've seen around you. If you conceive of some physical object. And so therefore, it depends how you define exist, but if you so therefore you can't make a distinction between something that exists in the mind and something that exists both in the mind and in reality, because originally you would have had to see it in reality to experience the idea about it.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, I'm just trying to poke holes in this argument, but anyway, we should. Hey, you know who will join? So, what do you want to talk about?
Well, I think we did. Well, do you want to keep going, or do you want to call it quits, or what?
Oh, I don't mind. Up to you, totally. Like, sorry, I talk way too much and too loud. It might have something to do with the fact that I drank like for the 3 days straight until I just woke up now. But yeah, I am actually going to sit down and write about this argument now.
Sure. Well, I'll post the links to the essay in the description box.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. The 6 points. Just keep in mind it sounds melodic. I will have to, I guess, read that chapter, the meditations again. If there's an online link, maybe I will post that too. To meditations. I think there might be at Gutenberg Project. They'll have a page on it. That's the free, books that are older than the books that are don't have that they're open public domain. Books in the public domain are on Gutenberg Project. Okay, so I'm gonna say goodbye.
Thanks very much. Thanks. See you later.
Okay, I will get the links and we'll put them in the description.
Alright, catch you later.
Okay, I'll talk to you later.